We welcome Adrian Shackney to address us tonight on the flora and fauna of Gawler pre-1839. Welcome.
So you probably think this is not too hard a topic. You go and find a book and look it up and tell people about it. It hasn't been like that at all. It's been like a 30-year detective story developing the information that I've prepared here tonight. And I've also brought along a few of the books and references that are relevant, but you have to see the bookshelves to understand the rest of it. So I've just made a note of a few of the people who've been involved over that period who've helped. So on to, now I'll just wait a second. This is a map that most of us involved in the area have probably seen. Came out in 1996 and it's been reproduced and it's still the basis for websites, government websites, etc., showing what is supposed to be the pre-European sort of vegetation of the, in this case, the whole of the Adelaide Plains, but up to Gawler. So so up here is Mallee Box woodland, all that brown area, and Peachy Belt woodland is seen as part of that. So we'll come to that along the way. So next. So this is a fairly general view, I think, of vegetation around the Adelaide Plains. We have a lot of it. So this is Peachy Belt, like that area between sort of Salisbury through to Gawler, pretty much. Darryl Crownview was one of the experts. This is a long story, full of trees, chopped down by 1848. Okay, and a lot of people think that we've chopped a lot of trees down, we should put them back. Okay, next. I won't cover this much, but when people came to Adelaide in 1836, first year or two, there's a whole lot of descriptions of the Adelaide Plains, the hills, quite open country, grassy lands, kangaroo grass up to the horses' wastes, etc., on the plains and the Adelaide Hills. So next. I'm not too concentrating on Adelaide, but there's a fabulous map that's been produced by the Royal Geographic Society. This is Grand Junction Road up here, Adelaide Hills, so it's sort of the Adelaide Plains. And it basically identifies across that whole area where there were trees or shrubs, thick shrubs, and I won't go through it, but shrubbery, black forest, Enfield, places where there was quite dense woodland, and then others that were more open. Okay, next. So moving up our way, when Colonel Light headed up towards Gawler, he drew some pictures. This one's at Gould Creek, one of the first little farms set up there, or grazing enterprises. So Gould Creek is where Little Parra Reservoir is now, up above Salisbury. Have a look, no, go back. Have a look at the hills there. Absolutely bare, from trees or shrubs. Okay, next. So this is Colonel Light at Dead Man's Pass, 1839 as well. So the red gums along the rivers that we're all familiar with. But what I look at in part is that don't wave too many sticks around. So this is the Gawler East sort of escarpment up here. So quite just scattered trees basically, fairly open country. Okay, next. This is Light painting out along the North Parra, so similar story. So this is the creek bed, North Parra bed. These are she oak trees here and fairly scattered eucalypt trees in that area. A grassy sort of hillside. Just one comment, by the way. A few of these pictures will disappear when the PowerPoint goes up on the website. There's 2 or 3 that I can use them for educational purposes, like the talk tonight, but we can't publish them because of copyright issues. Most of them will be up there though. Okay, next. This is a picture of the Gawler 4,000 acre survey that Light Fitters & Co did, And the thing to notice is that it goes all out along the North Parra River essentially, and right out at the end is Turretfield. Now why did it go out there and not out the South Parra? I mean, what they're looking, farmers are looking for water, they're looking for farming land, grazing land, etc. Well, there's plenty of water in the South Parra, but it's steep, it's rocky, and it's difficult access, and a fair few trees. Out in that area, out towards the towards Turretfield, mostly very open land when you look at the old records, and that's the reason you go out there, because you can put a plough through the country without clearing trees. Okay, next. This is a picture of, which you've probably seen before, this is a picture of looking towards Clonlee. So this is Main North Road, as we know it now, and the diversion around with that bridge that was built in 1842. So this is Mr. Frome, his tent's there, that's the Reeds houses and sheds across on the right hand side. And again, you've got quite a good picture there of the vegetation right early on of that hill of Williston, etc., across what's now Hewitt, some of it as well, further up. Okay, next. Now you won't have seen this one. This is a fabulous picture. This is just found in the last few months from the Mitchell Library, State Library in New South Wales. It's a picture by William Cawthorne. That's the heading, Gawler Plains showing Gawler River. So this is Gawler River, sort of meandering across the plains, the big red gums there. The artist is sitting somewhere like up on the escarpment on sort of Riggs Hill Road, those Gawler South sort of foothills, I guess. So this is probably a little bit of the South Parra sort of on the right here, and this is a picture 1844, so this is stock grazing out here, some Aboriginal people here, and that's an Aboriginal campsite showing down there. So it's probably a sort of bit of a manufactured picture in a sense, but what it's showing here is the environment. No one was clearing land at this time, except to build a house maybe or whatever. So very open country, down the hill slope, across the plains, a bit hard to tell out on the other side, but it's intending to show the hills obviously through to the hummocks, I guess, but it doesn't tell you much about the vegetation on the other side. Next. And we get to memoirs of Eliza Reid. Now Eliza was quite young when a teenager, I think, when they first came up to Gawler in 1839. So I've got a series of quotes here from her memoirs. Now these were written about 60 years later, so she was 70 or so when she wrote this. But very interesting wording that she's used. There's a series of things. This is a bit early on. This is down near Dry Creek, so we passed through 3 miles of grassland, a lot of kangaroo grass, and we lit a fire which got away and burnt most of the Adelaide Plains. But it was grassy sort of. Okay, as you do. This is middle of February. You're lighting a fire out in the open grassy paddock. It's not recommended. Okay, so this is Eliza Reid talking about the view across Gawler. So looking from the hill, in this case it's going to be somewhere back on the Gawler East sort of escarpment. Park-like and beautiful, the fork, where the river junction is, being well marked with splendid gum trees, kangaroo grass, flowers, wattles, etc. Okay, next. So beyond Williston, or the other side of their land at least, their land didn't incorporate the whole of Williston. Mallee and pines, fine trees, used for the buildings. Comments about the water and the vegetation along the North Parra, which I mentioned before. Basically, no shrubs along the North Parra, open country, reeds in the river. And interesting, the people building their first houses at the time used native pine a lot. We use this expression, wattle and daw. Well, I used to talk about pine and pug, because that's what they were, mud and pine. And there's stories about people, travelling right out as far as Redbanks, collecting pine over the years for building in around Gawler. So then there's some description from Eliza Reid about the South Parra. This is right early on when they first came, this is, February, describing travelling a bit up the South Parra to have a look. So lots of gum trees and lots of shrubs. She's calling it Canedia, it's actually Hardin verdure we call it these days. Wattles, clematis, many others. And talking about grazing. Okay, next. This is from Eliza's husband, Ross, Eliza's brother, Ross. Story in the Bunyip, again much later, but pretty straightforward. Fair quantity of timber east of Gawler especially after you get to Sandy Creek. Now you'll all be familiar, you drive across through Gawler East, Calbeaver, you get to Sandy Creek, and where Sandy Creek comes through, big red gums and blue gums, etc., and then you're hitting more trees. Until you get there, not so much. Okay. Then we get to some of the explorers' descriptions. A lot of words here, but once we get through it, there's a lot more pictures. Okay, so this is Edward Eyre in 1839. Comes through from Adelaide, first day to the Little Parra. Open, fertile country. Then heads through to Gawler the next day. Same sort of open plains. This is important. Skirted with trees to the west, and undulating, lightly timbered hills to the east. So these people are all travelling straight up what we call Main North Road now, essentially, heading fastest way you can get to Gawler. Okay, next. This is Mr. Hales, who obviously came to Gawler in 1839 before the old Spot Hotel was built at Salisbury, because he says there were no habitations between Gawler and Adelaide when he first came through. This is a fabulous description. So when it was hot, it was pretty awful travelling to Gawler. When it was winter and spring, when it was cool and moist, a grassy carpet variegated with flowers of diversified hues, more gracefully distributed than could have been suggested by the most skillful designers of patterns, was spread beneath you. Very pleasant. Next. Carrying on the same description, an emu, a kangaroo, but more frequently a bustard or two, would cross your path and instantly retreat amidst the belt of trees which continuously intervened between the apparently interminable plain and the shore of St. Vincent's Gulf. So, big plain over there towards the coast trees. Okay, then we've got some description from Francis Dutton. Now, Dutton was the biggest landlord in the state, basically. He owned Anlaby Station from 1839. It was all just leasehold or licensed land initially. But he wrote a book in 1846, and he's quoting this. This is not Dutton himself. He's quoting someone in about 1840 when someone associated with George Fife Angus travelled up to look at the 7 surveys in the Barossa that Angus had bought after having his arm twisted by a few people. So talk about Adelaide, Parra and Gawler Plains. Immense extent. In some places a plough might be driven 12 or 14 miles without a single obstruction. So, straight up there. Okay, next. And then this is Dutton still. So he's talking about little clearing being undertaken and thousands of acres being broken up, ploughed up, so with no trees effect. So then he talks about where you will find trees, forests in the mountain districts, but also in a lot of the agricultural areas there's scattered trees around. Typically these big red gums up in the high rainfall areas, but down across the foothills here, for example, mallee box, maybe peppermint box. Okay. This is I love this one. Some evil person has destroyed the 5-mile tree on the Gawler Plain. 1846. So this tree, remarkable tree for its isolated position, provided both a visual relief and also somewhere where you could get some shade. So on this road from Gawler to Adelaide, there's a tree. And it got chopped down. Okay. People, at least the editor of the register was pretty upset, and obviously other people were as well. Okay, then looking north of Gawler, we've got again a similar sort of lot of descriptions from those very early years as to what the landscape was like. So this is pre-light, this is 1838 when George Stevens and T.B. Strangways went through Gawler. There's not a lot of detail there, but I've sort of interpreted a bit to explain where they're going. They travelled on, according to George Stevens, who wrote the article, travelled upon a tableland of rotten, poor soil, with scarcely a tree upon it, presenting far and wide a melancholy landscape of burnt tufts of grass and charred bushes. So, this is February, so obviously a fire had gone through, and what's left was charred remains of that fire.
That was the Reed fire.
No, this is north of Gawler, not the one that was between Dry Creek and somewhere near Gawler. Okay, so this is heading out towards Freeling from Gawler. Okay, so they headed north a fair way, couldn't find any water course, they didn't make it as far as the Light River. Decided to come back and noted in this area that obviously wasn't burned kangaroo grass, even though they say the soil was pretty poor. So that's and then they headed off down the Gawler River, and there's a very nice description as well of what they found along the Gawler River, but I won't talk about that because that's mainly down near Buckland Park. So keeping on with their story, not many birds or kangaroos out there at the time, but their horse crushed what they called a little bandicoot, squatted in a hole near the surface. And they describe that as a small animal smaller than a kangaroo rat, which is bettong. It's a small little hoppy kangaroo. Large nose, ears, short tail, and I think they're right, it's bandicoot. I thought when I first read it, it might have been a bilby, but bilbies have longer tails, so I think we'll stick with bandicoot. Not sure what species, because there's 2 or 3 possible species of bandicoots that we're talking about at the time that were around. Okay, next. So this is Eyre after he headed off from Gawler. This is 1839, and he's heading due north. Fine open district consisting of grassy, lightly wooded country and open downs, that's open plains essentially, soil rich timber, box, which is in that mainly peppermint box, mallee box potentially, and casuarina, which is shig oaks. So this is heading from here sort of through to Linwood, somewhere on the Light River. There's a map showing that. He's right, he pretty much headed straight north. Okay, next. And they describe as the ranges to the east. So grassy, open grassy hills in the front, so foothills, open grassy, and behind that the hills, which if you're familiar with them are, have a fair bit of wood on them further back, around Kaiserstuhl, etc., and further north. Country extending northwards under the hills, so foothills, very beautiful, lightly wooded, grassy and fertile. To the west, out towards more on the Adelaide Plains, the hills were high, bare and somewhat bleak, so basically fairly treeless in that area as well. Now, next one. So this is, Eyre came through again in 1840, again headed slightly different route this time. He went on the southern side of the North Parra out to about Kingsford, and then crossed over, but then headed to the station he'd established on the Light River, which is Bagot Well, if people know that, but it's basically northeast of Kapunda on the way to Udunda, but right on the River Light. And the locals up there still call it Eyre's Flat. Fascinating. After all this time, I thought, I drew a map of it and I thought, it's got to be about there somewhere. I was out by a couple of kilometres and I was talking to one of the landowners. Oh no, he said, that's Eyre's Flat you're talking about, that's over there. He took me around, it was brilliant. Okay, and this is sort of, I'd say a probably less observant sort of comment, but the number of times you see comments in the paper from people, writings about the boring, monotonous plains and the similar sort of comments, and the magnificent hills with trees. It's a very European sort of view of the environment. And if it was green, there was water, and there were tall trees, that was beautiful. If there was open plains that went brown in the middle of summer, well, that was pretty ordinary, monotonous, dreary plains. And you see those sort of comments really commonly. So that's Mr. Brock. I mean, he wasn't a silly man. He actually went on the Sturt's expedition to the inland in 1844. Wrote some pretty questioned Sturt's sort of performance quite a bit. Okay, so that's sort of a story up to about mid-1840s of what explorers were seeing around this sort of district. There's lots of other information that you dig up. So these are early botanists who came to the area and collected plants. So first one around our area was Bayer. Came to South Australia, spent about 2 years here altogether over that time. And particularly travelled through Gawler, Barossa, but also over towards the Murray, Murrumbidgee, and down through the Murray Plains a bit. Okay, so half of his records are in Germany and half are in Melbourne. The German ones, the ones in Germany are still written up in German or Latin. You have to use Google Translate to sort of work out what's going on. But these are examples of the plants that Bayer collected and are in the German herbarium at Halle. So hairy tails of Tylotus. Where do you find it? Dry hills at Gawler Town. Next. And this is a leek orchid, pine forest at Gawler Town. So pine forest was a description these botanists used to describe the sort of land that's sort of around Williston Cemetery, Sandy Creek, Altona, sort of these sandy soils, a lot of native pines, other things as well, fairly dense vegetation, quite obviously. They have this word pine forest. I don't know what it means in German, but that's what it comes out at. So this is leek orchid, somewhere out here, Williston area. Holly leaf grevillea, same place. None of those three plants can be found out there now. They're not necessarily a long way away, but certainly not around Gawler, close by Gawler. Okay, then I've produced a few more. These are ones that are around not too far away, but they weren't necessarily found in Gawler, but they're ones that are around close by. The next one, Stackhausia candles. People are probably familiar with some of them who are used to looking through the parks in the hills. Okay, Bayer also was a big collector of insects, moths, butterflies particularly. This one's pretty famous. This is the original specimen of what's called pale sun moth. It was found near Gawler. Last records were about 1910, but last year some people discovered them again at near Peterborough. Quite a few population in Victoria, but for South Australia, around this area is sort of, or the Adelaide Plains is the only place they've ever been found. Okay, next one's Ferdinand Muller. In South Australia for 5 years. He collected somewhere in the order of 2,500 specimens in South Australia in that time. Kept them in his herbarium, and several hundred of them were from around this Gawler, Barossa sort of district. The world was a pretty small place in those days. Up here you had Gawler, you had a few farmers at Lyndoch, Bethany, a few people at Langmile. That was sort of the world in those days, as far as Europeans went. So here's a few of the Muller ones. They're in Melbourne, all his collections in Melbourne. So a couple of plants collected. Gawler, same issue. Just go back one, if you can. No, it doesn't matter. Yeah, this is Swainsona bayeriana. It's a really pretty little pea plant with blue flowers. The interesting thing is that Muller named it after Bayer, but there's no proper record of Bayer ever collecting it. But he actually did collect one. It's in the Halle herbarium, but it was misdiagnosed. I've got to send out a copy and have a look at it, and everyone agrees, yes, it's Swainsona bayeriana, but the person in Germany who recorded at the time called it one that's found in Queensland. So when you look at the map, there's a whole pile in Queensland and New South Wales, one recorded down here. So Yeah, you got it wrong. Okay, keep going. Richard Schomburg, most people will know Dr. Schomburg as he was, out at Brookveld for 16 years, curator of the Gawler Museum for 6 years, director of Adelaide Botanic Gardens after that till he died in 1891. 1863, he sent a collection of reptiles mainly, a few amphibians to Germany. Pop back one, okay. Professor Peters. And they included the original pygmy blue-tongued lizards for the world and collected near Gawler. Fascinating. That's a pygmy blue-tongued lizard. They were basically the same sort of story. They were sort of recorded up to about 1910, I think. Sort of a few areas, Marion, Dry Creek, a couple of places down here, a bit up north, just disappeared. Then about 20 years ago they got rediscovered up north of Burra, near Burra, and now they've found sort of like 25 sites where they exist, and they're not as uncommon as people thought. But amazingly, not one landholder knew they were there. They're very cryptic, live in holes, up in the hills. No one knew they were there till the scientists went out and looked for them. Okay, next. So this is Marion von Kreuzler, who also lived out at Brookveld for about 30 years before she moved to Nuriootpa. She collected thousands of insects, mostly butterflies, moths and beetles. Contributed a lot to various museums and overseas. You know, her name regularly comes up in all the entomological journals between about 1860s to 1880. And she sold a major collection of insects to the Adelaide Museum for £210. That was a lot of money in those days. That was the value of a house. That was a new house. Okay, next. Johannes Odwan also lived at Brookveld. He actually bought it with Mrs. Kreuzler. Not sure exactly what was going on there. Mrs. Kreuzler was a widow. So they at least coexisted. And a bit the same. He was an entomologist, just collected heaps of insects mostly, but also he collected birds' eggs and birds and all this sort of stuff and donated some of them to the museums as well. Okay, next. Johan Tepper lived out more Barossa way, but he was a teacher, wrote up a whole lot of articles between about 1878 to 1910 about all sorts of vegetation, insects, birds, etc. But he collected a lot of insects around this area, but also he was active in what we call the Field Naturalist Society, and they used to go out on these monthly sort of trips all over the place, and they made several trips to Gawler, or near Gawler, and particularly they looked at places out at Gawler Belt and towards Roseworthy campus, and recorded quite a few plants when they were doing that, and a few bugs and things as well. Okay, next. Darryl Crownville, he was the author of that earlier than that. He was a fantastic collector. He collected around all across the state, but particularly in the sort of near metro sort of areas for about 50 years. And he collected at least a couple of hundred specimens near Gawler, Williston Cemetery mainly, and the rail corridor near Williston over that period. He wrote the book, and there's fabulous information in that book. Okay, so this is sort of more recent documentation of what's around, to try and work out whether things that were around earlier are still around. So there's a whole lot of things. I've been involved in most of them, but particularly the last ones. Been fascinating sort of work over 20 years probably, a massive database, and we'll end up in the system one day. Okay, so here's a sort of big picture view of vegetation. So Mullabaya and the few people who were around in the 19th century, sort of a couple of hundred native plant species recorded for Gawler, which is not quite the same as the council area, but nearby. And about 500 in the region, sort of Adelaide Plains, Barossa, Plains sort of around Smithfield, that's what I'm calling our region. Of those, let's go back, of those plants that they recorded, about 50 in Gawler are no longer here, can't find them, and for the broader region there's another 50 that you can't find. So they're not to say they're not somewhere, not too far away, but they've gone from our area. Here's an example of how to use this data. So this is relying on the information that Darryl Crownville produced for Williston Cemetery and Gawler Belt Rail Corridor in the mid-60s, and checking that out now. 25 species in the Williston Cemetery, definitely not there. Another 25 species out on the rail corridor, definitely not there. Some are close by again, but they're not in those areas. So that's sort of an indication of where, you know, how much things have changed. That's only last 50 years, roughly. Okay, next. So other resources that you chase up, these are sort of survey maps. This is from 1849 in the, this is the Peachy Belt story a bit. This is just south of Anglevale. So here's a map with, this is trees, the rest is open country, and usually there's a little description here about, you know, open arable land or whatever that goes with it. Okay, next. This patch then is further south between, it's pretty much along Heaslip Road, from sort of near, below Anglevale, but down to Penfield. And again, this is the description. It's fascinating, this little one though. This is trees, and there's a ring of trees around here. Come to that in a minute, as to what that might be about. Next. Okay, and we have old aerial maps. These are from 1935. And most people probably haven't seen them. They're taken by the Air Force. Some people have seen them because I've hawked them around a bit, but they're not available in South Australia, but they are available through a company in Victoria that's got access to Commonwealth stuff, and they're actually cheaper than state maps. So these are great maps for showing what was along the rivers and, you know, reserves and things like that in 1935. And then there's another one further south. Okay, so these are the creeks coming out of the hills in Evanston Park and Evanston South. 1935. So here's the creek, this is Potts Road. Here's the creek on Potts Road, a lot of trees there, still there, a lot of trees. These other creeks. This is the one that runs into Dead Man's Pass. Basically no trees at all. And you have to think this through as to what the story is, but you know, there's no evidence of trees ever being there. You can't find a stump, you can't find a chopped off piece of a tree, so you end up thinking, well, they probably weren't there. But come back to that. Okay, next. So, then we get into the problems. So this is a map produced by Professor Wood in 1937, Vegetation of South Australia. So, here's Gawler. This is all box woodland. All the way through. This is mallee woodland. And then you get back into the hills. This is all the sort of central hills, and then a little belt of sort of open woodland below the hills, but even that's quite high up. So, you know, Main North Road, as you know, comes straight up through here and heads sort of up here. So, you know, we're in woodland here. The grassland starts north of Burra. Okay, next. Now this is a bit clearer in a way. This is 1980. These are the people who ran the Woods and Forest Department. So here we are again. Here's Gawler. This is the Mallee Plains sort of area, Mallee woodland. Here's the box woodland all through here, and then you get back into the sort of high rainfall forest sort of country, and yellow's grassland again north of Burra. And there's a fascinating comment on one of these maps saying, well, probably the reason there weren't any trees up there was it was pretty cold, and maybe that wiped them out. No problem finding trees up there now, I can tell you. They grow very well. Okay, next. So this is where we're up to with the mapping that's up on the websites now. So this is the old Adelaide Plains map from 1996, the Darrell Crownbill map. Barossa woodland all through here. And this has been changed up here. That was redone about 10 years ago. And so grassland's sort of coming in, but rather tentatively. But still all this land up the foothills and up through the main things is woodland, and some of it's open. The descriptions aren't sort of suggesting it's forest, but it's basically woodland. The other thing that's really significant when you look at these maps, see all these red crosses here? They're where our parks are. Look where they are. They're all in the high rainfall, stringy bark country. Or the Sandy Creek and Altona are these pine forests of the early botanists, where deep sand or sand, pretty sandy country left, or mine for sand. That's where we ended up with our park. You can see how unrepresentative they are of what's there now. Interesting. Okay, we'll come back to that. All right. So I come from a farming background. I've talked to farmers. Farmers will tell you they cleared all the land. They just, sweat of the brow. They did a lot of things. And the funny thing is, the environmentalists agree with them. They say, all those bloody farmers, they went out and cleared all the land, and so that everyone agrees. Farmers went out and cleared all the land. Well, I don't agree with that. I don't think anyone went out and cleared land unless there was either money to be made clearing the land, or they needed it for
building
housing or whatever. And look at the technology in the 80s. It was axes. You swung an axe to clear a tree in those days. You did not have any other means. And people keep talking about putting back trees as well, but not necessarily wrong. Okay, next. So this was my first go at having a 2012, drawing a map of, this is sort of south of Gawler, so Gawler River, Main North Road, hills. So based on those explorers, stories, etc., and those maps. So these areas here are those pieces shown. I showed you those maps of the surveyors, so that round patch, that little patch, and then this sort of strip around here with a little strip up here. Big patch in the middle, no trees. And here's this is that Gould Creek, little para reservoir sort of area. Clearly open grassy land. That was my first go, okay. But I had plenty of trees along the foothills and things as well. Next. So this is a second go. So this is for our understory project. So it's fairly wide. So here's Gawler River up on the Light River. So this is pretty straightforward. This is Mallee woodland sort of country, and this is sort of saltbush shrub sort of country and coastal country. So both the yellow and the green is either grassland or grassy woodland. For understory plants, you don't really care, but it's mostly grassland, a fair few trees. And then this is the sort of high rainfall, dense woodland, heathland sort of patches. Okay, next. And this is sort of where we've landed now. This is the Gawler Biodiversity Management Plan that's just been adopted by Council. So this is a map that's just Gawler Council. Gets squeezed off a bit here, up to the river, across the river, up to Williston, lost a bit of it here, and out here. So, again, the Mallee pines on the sand dunes, woodland. A lot of this woodland is actually river box woodland, just big, really big trees. Trees along the South Para, not much along the North Para. Grassland across the plains and in the foothills, and then this sort of mixture of trees and grasses sort of through the foothills for the most part, upstream of Gawler. And here's the pine trees at the Harbison's place. Native pines along the Gawler East Escarpment there for part of the way, and also some up at Williston Cemetery, and another patch out here. That's the patch on Haynes Road where there's a dune there that comes through. So it's much more detailed and accurate now than we've ever seen. Next. Okay, so I brought along a few books and things you might just have a look at. But one of them is Bill Gamage. He wrote a book about 8 years ago, and he talked a lot about why the Australian landscape was like it was when first settlers came. And his theory is pretty much Aboriginal people did a lot of burning, and they manipulated the environment through burning to create a lot of these open spaces, and to use not just open grassy lands, but open grassy lands in amongst trees and shrubs and things. Because if you want to catch kangaroos, you burnt the land when it was nice and green. Then you snuck up on them behind the trees and bushes if you could, and you speared them. So this sort of management, that's part of what Gamage is saying. I think he probably exaggerates it a bit in some places, but the thinking is definitely right. I mean, that's like this stuff north of Burra where professors are saying, well, we don't know, probably the frost got all these trees. And you go up there now, there's trees everywhere. Nothing kills the trees, but burning will, if you burn persistently. Wildfires won't, they just come and go and the trees recover, and then a few years later you might get another fire. But if you burn regularly, you can do it. And just for example, I mean, along the rivers here, big red gums tended to be, 40, 50 metres apart, and you can tell from the stumps that are left there. Then they have big wide canopies. Now you need big wide canopies to create hollows. Possums live in hollows. If you're an Aboriginal person, you eat possums, lots of them. So you want these big wide old trees with hollows and wide canopies to catch possums. Have a look now when we get a flood, you get a mass of young red gums come up as a forest, very skinny, they'll never spread out and create good wide branches and hollows. So what do? You burn them out. And that's got to be what happened to get this system of, a tree here, 50 metres later there's another tree, 50 metres, it's quite a good pattern of it in places along the river in Gawler here. And it didn't happen by accident, because you just see what's happening now. You just get these masses of trees that are all skinny and they're not going to die out and then suddenly one big one takes over. It's not happening. It hasn't happened for 100 years, so I don't think it'll happen. Okay, next. Yeah, so yep, covered all that. So here's a little map. You won't be able to read. The yellow spots are remnant grasslands area around our district. So here's Gawler. This is sort of Kapunda up here, Adelaide Plains out to Dublin. So, and orange spots are grassy woodland. So, fairly open trees, but fairly open country. And then, so those sort of spots where I've collected data that really shows that sort of thing. Okay, next. So here's just a couple of pictures of grassland around here. This is on the south bank of the South Parra in Dead Man's Pass. So this is kangaroo grass here, spear grasses, wallaby grasses. This is all planted trees up here, which is in cultivated land, and this is the South Parra River sort of corridor through here. It's just a thin strip that missed getting cultivated. But it's got about 60 native plant species in a hectare or two there. It's brilliant. Got to find them, hard to find them, they're there. Okay, next. This is out on the creek through Gawler East, out at Springwood. So this is pre-olive removal. This is all irongrass grassland here. These are all Lomandra grassland, Lomandra irongrass plants through there. That's a critically endangered environmental association nationally, so very important. And no one even knew it was there. Indeed, the consultant who was doing the report for the developers in Gawler East didn't find it for the first 2 years. Surprisingly, didn't find it until we pointed out, actually you better go and have a look at it and check it out. And now it's recognised. It's very high value. Okay, this is a couple of examples around. Well, this is down on Dalkeith Road at Cutler. That's an area of kangaroo grass growing there near Dalkeith Road and spreading. I mean, it was a tiny patch a few years ago. It's spread quite a bit now. I mean, the area was previously cultivated, so obviously the grass is removed. But as soon as you take that away, kangaroo grass quite likes it there. Next. This is also it's Tibia actually. This is corner of Anglevale Road and Dalkeith Road. It's Anglevale Road. It's a paddock with a lot of wallaby grass in it, called white tops for obvious reasons. But there's a whole lot of other native grasses in there as well. So this is taken a few years ago. And again, that paddock's been cultivated, but they have recolonised that paddock extremely quickly. Seed blows around. This is a patch that Light Council and Gawler Council created. It's on the tip of where the bypass meets Main North Road. There's a little patch of a hectare or so in there, and this is again a ploughed paddock, but there's a bit of grassland, remnant grassland, particularly on this side, a bit on that side maybe. And over a period of years, the seed can spread quite quickly, and mowing works fantastically. It keeps down the bulk of weedy plants. That's the grass, native grasses seed rate, and within 15 years, those council staff who slashed it without even knowing what they were doing created a native grassland. Brilliant. First prize. This is interesting. This is a really quite diverse grassland, just native grassland, just north of Kapunda. And what's interesting about this is quite low. I mean, I know we get these descriptions of kangaroo grass up here. You have to take all that with a bit of grain of salt. If you're looking sideways at something or through something, sure. In high rainfall country, you get very dense kangaroo grass and other grasses, but in lower rainfall country, the grassland areas are quite open, that's a necessary thing in a way, because most of the species in those grasslands are small herb plants that don't get more than shin high, maybe knee high max. They need the sun to hit the ground in order to germinate, to grow, etc. Now they will not survive. Like in that same paddock, there's a patch of kangaroo grass near the road that's quite dense. Virtually none of those small daisies, lilies, etc. are growing in that patch of kangaroo grass. With kangaroo grass, you've got to burn it regularly. It loves fire. You burn it regularly, it keeps it open, and then the system works. If you just let it go, it just thatches up and everything else gets wiped out. Okay, next. That's on the railway line between Roseworthy and Freeling. So that's, again, a very nice, diverse area of native grassland that survived because the railway went through in about 1859, and there was very little farming happened in that area until then, and so that patch survived. And one of the reasons it survived is because when they did cuttings, they tipped all the soil up on the side of the railway line. So where they didn't do that, a lot of it's been farmed, cropped, but where these soil was tipped up on the side of the thing, it was just left and no one's driven in and cropped it. So all the plants that were sort of there have recovered and regrown. Really nice native grassland up there. Okay, next. That's northern Kapunda. That's an area that was classified as woodland in those maps. Didn't have trees. You cannot see a tree from miles away. Okay, next. And this is when I talk about grassy woodland, this is the sort of thing you're talking about. It's pretty open. There are trees and some shrubs, but you can see through it for a long way. It's open. It compares to the sort of shrubby country that you see Sandy Creek, Altona. You cannot see through that country very far at all. Okay, next. This is another little remnant. This is the creek line through Gawler East. It's a bit salty, so it's got a lot of sedges, salt-tolerant sedges in it, but it's a fascinating little ecosystem there because of the springs that come through and feed it all year round. Okay, now how am I going for time? I'm on to 4. I'm 2/3 of the way through.
Yes.
Good. So the fauna story is a bit simpler, but even so, it's still complicated. So there's a list of sort of things that have disappeared from around this area, definitely. Numbats, quolls, bilby, platypus further up in the hills. Tamo wallaby, dingoes, only been around for about 5,000 years, but they were pygmy possums, red kangaroos, white-footed tree rats, bettongs, phascogales, and some others. And the interesting thing is there are a whole lot of species that actually aren't recorded as being around, but probably were here. And the way we've found it out is archaeologists are now digging up in caves and Aboriginal middens and food sites along the Adelaide Plains and down further, and then they look at the bones, and they'll turn up these marsupial mice, marsupial rats, rodents, but marsupial mice and some dunnarts and things like that have not been recorded around this area, but they're in these middens, for example. Now, that means they've got to be here. I mean, because they're nocturnal and small, didn't get recorded, obviously, so we've got a task on our hands to understand all that, and there's a lot of work being done. It'll appear over the next 20 years probably. Be good. Okay, well, we've got a fair number of mammals that were around that are still here. Possums, echidna, western grey kangaroos, euros, water rats and bats. Bats, we haven't lost any bats. They are all here still. 7 species definitely in Gawler. There's an 8th one that floats around a bit further north. We've got hairy-nosed wombats still over on the Light River and up on the Light River, over on the Light River in a few places. Might even have grey flying foxes soon. They've moved into the Botanic Gardens. Koalas, introduced. Didn't live here ever before. 70,000 years ago maybe. They were in the southeast, but up here they were introduced. And they're doing very well. Okay? So these are from Gould's Mammals of Australia, so I've just taken some pictures. These are out of copyright, so they'll be on the system. These are some of the animals that were here that aren't. So just flick through these. There's numbat, bilby, burrowing bettong, brush-tail bettong, quolls, Tamar wallaby, red kangaroo, which these are ones I mentioned before, tree rats, dingoes, and there are some others I can put them all. Okay, so here's some of the ones that are not around, not too far away. There's wombat. Plenty of echidnas around, especially along the rivers. Euros, Euros, you pick them by the red on the flanks and under their ears. They're around now. They've pretty much disappeared until a few years ago. They're back again. Now I've listed some. These are reptiles that you're likely to run into. Now, they're probably not all reptile lookers, but I've listed about 25 that are around that you can expect that if you look hard enough, you should find them. So just flick through them. So yeah, that includes the long-necked turtle, which is fairly common in the river system. I just took a picture. That's one of the biggest skinks that's up in the Gawler East sort of creek line. Yep. There's Gould's goanna. They're quite common. They're right on the the railway line anywhere where there's sand dunes on the other Gawler belt and out onto Reeves Plains, you'll find the Gould's goannas. There's probably 1,000 of them out on this area of the Adelaide Plains. Some that aren't around now, death adders. The records of them just near Gawler early on. The only place you find them now is a handful of little spots over near the coast. And basically people hunted them. They used to go out with sticks and beaters and chase them out and kill them. So no wonder there's not too many around. I'm calling it human predation kindly. That's spag, sorry. And pygmy blue-tongued lizards I've listed there as well. But there's a few other things, again, we're not sure about. Tiger snakes, carpet pythons, they're probably around, but there are no records that are sensibly you can rely on at this stage. So birds have generally done not too bad in terms of losing species. We've got at least 100 species around here that are, you reasonably regularly see them over a period of a few years at least, and about the same number that sort of come and go a bit every now and again. So that's not too bad. But there's a few that have definitely disappeared. Some have been mentioned. The bustard, that's the big tall bird, weighs about 10, 12 kilos when they're full grown. You can understand why they disappeared. People ate them unmercifully. Malleefowl. Now, there's proper records of malleefowl out at Reeves Plains in the scrub out there, at least in about 1860s. So they were definitely around. Plains wanderer. Good records on the Adelaide Plains. You won't find them. The nearest place you'll find them now is sort of up, way north of Peterborough and out that way. Just while I'm thinking about it, I've got a box of eggs here that I got off Paul Barnett. His great-great-grandfather, Robert Barnett, collected eggs back in the 1880s, around 1880. There's 2 eggs there labelled Plains Wanderer, amongst others. Most of the rest aren't labelled properly. Have a look at it. Look, not touch. But that's, they were around this area. Okay, and then I'll put a few pictures of birds that are not around. So this will be a big surprise to people. These major Mitchell cockatoos now are sort of an arid land bird. They've disappeared from here. They were nesting in Gawler according to Gould and presumably the Reeds who were observing them in 1839. So pet trade's been their main problem. Next, Plains Wanderer. These little kingfishers, they're tiny little things. They were recorded certainly up until the 1950s around here, but gone now. Curlews, until recently out in the hills. I don't know whether they would ever be here much, but certainly not too far away. Malleefowl, bustards, and glossy-backed cockatoos. People who've been to the display at the museum, you'll recognise a couple of these pictures where they've come from. But they rely on sheo fruit to survive. They're now restricted to Kangaroo Island, but early on they were up here, and there are records of people seeing them. But the problem was the sheoaks got chopped down, partly for firewood. It was sort of top value firewood, and also for fodder for animals in drought. The farmers would chop down the branches and whatever, and the stock will just kill off any regeneration. So once their life expectancy is not much more than 100 years, 150 years. So once you lose them, they're gone unless you allow them to regenerate. So they've disappeared. So glossy back cockatoos have pretty much gone with them. Okay, emus. So were here, went, got reintroduced at Parawira, so they're through the Adelaide Hills now, but they don't seem to be mixing with the ones that are further out on the plains. They're just a separate population that stick out there. And I've put a couple of nice pictures from Matt and Helen. This is the sort of things you're good at. If you live on the edge of Gawler, you see some of these. These are diamond firetails. They're a state vulnerable rated species, so they're hard to find. But they live in open sort of woodland, grassland sort of. Finches are seed eaters, so they rely on grasses mostly for their tucker. Southern Gawler East. And this is a black chin honey eater. That's seriously rare. Don't worry about the sparrow. Forget about that. But the black chin honey. The blue eyes are an amazing giveaway. That's spectacular. There's brown quail, which are also very rare. They're down in the Environment Department land on Smith Road, which has been planted up over recent years. There's a flock of that. Now here's some that have turned up that haven't been, are not really locals. I mean, I don't know that you can prove they were never here, but both little corellas and galahs were essentially northern species early on, and they moved in because of food supply that we've been giving them. So little corellas, not here before, generally. Galahs the same. There was a story in about 1850, Mr. Finnis, who Finnis Street's named after. He was the first Premier of South Australia, 1857. He got very excited because he found a galah on the Light River near Linwood. This was a rare thing in those early years. They weren't there. Okay, next. And crested pigeons. These were a seriously arid land bird early on. They have moved like from 10-inch rainfall into here, and they're a very common species now. But they weren't here originally. So a bit of this is on frogs. So there's 4 fairly common species. They're all still relatively common in the creeks. Not so common. Painted frog and brown toadlet. Trouble with fish. Got problems with fish because of the blockages in the rivers mostly. But so the first ones are things that live in sort of as much in the sea as in the rivers. So they're a sort of coastal type species mostly, the lampreys and eel. But they've been recorded up in the rivers, but they're hard to find them. The other ones which live in the rivers but go down to the coast to breed and then come back again, they've sort of survived despite getting blocked a lot by the weirs along the river. And then there's a couple of common ones that are seen reasonably regularly in the local creeks and things like that. And invertebrates, well, there are tens of thousands of them. They're not well recorded. We're not sure how many there are. We don't know how many we've lost. But, there's a lot of work going on to deal with that. And there's also a lot of introduced snails and slugs and things that complicate things. And makes life hard because most people can't tell the difference between a nice caterpillar and a bad caterpillar, so they tend to get wiped out fairly regularly. Okay, so this is some current stuff. If you want to get information like this is a fantastic site, Atlas of Living Australia. You bring up maps like this. This is Gawler, and that shows records for all of the animals, plants, bugs and things, fungus, that are recorded around this area. You click on the system and download it and produce all this data, when it was found, etc. So the next one sort of shows you. So here's the list of species. Here's the list of sort of different things, fish, mollusks, crustaceans that you can look for separately all together. Great resource. You'll find my name in there a bit with some of this data that's there. Sea Conservation Centre website is great for good plant ID. They've got good close-up pictures of a whole lot of plant species, so it makes it very easy to look at it, compare those, and see pods and young plants, etc. SA Nature is a good place to look. It's a white-winged triller out of Para Woodland 3 or 4 days ago. And what are we doing now? Well, we've got a good biodiversity management plan. We're making sure we understand grassy systems better, not just planting trees in them. Yep. And a few things like, this is interesting because some of this I wrote a few years ago. I said, well, look out for Lotus australis. Well, since then we've found Lotus australis. That's good. And so just to finish off, just a few ideas that I've put down about keeping an eye on things and looking out for things. The other thing to think about as well is, environmental restoration, we talk a lot about provenance for seed and things. One of the issues we've got in an area like Gawler, where everything's really small and fragmented, is seed supplies are often quite poor. So, you know, if you get seed from, you know, two remnant plants of a species somewhere, it's probably not very viable. So, you know, you need to look around a bit further and have a bit of a regional approach as to how to, you know, find seed and replicate, rebuild things. All right, I think that does. So, as I mentioned, I've got these books to look, and the birds eggs. Fascinating.
Please, I'd like to invite Andrew Philpott to give a vote of thanks. Thanks. Thank you. Stand over there. Right. The microphone. Yep. Stand next to me.
Thanks very much, Brian. I live at St Kitts. My neighbours are the Noaks, the Obes, the Semlers, the Rosenzweigs and the Dakies. I'll have no German jokes tonight, thanks. As always, a great presentation from Adrian. The reoccurring theme I was thinking tonight is jigsaw, and I think what Adrian's done beautifully is both a historical jigsaw and a spatial jigsaw, because we are living in a biodiversity, very disjointed world now, about, you know, little pockets of biodiversity that we're trying to re-knit jigsaws. And full credit to Gawler Council, Mayor Karen and elected members for your biodiversity plan. It's an absolute cracker, so wish you every success on that journey. So it's exciting times ahead. So a wonderful presentation again, and I think it's amazing how quickly through a short period of history how we've lost information that Adrian's done a wonderful job in trying to reassemble and make sense of those early pioneering sort of observations, and how quickly we have, I guess, misinterpreted that information. And it's great to sort of take a bit of a pause and think about how we might sort of reassemble that and, you know, and go forward. So actually I'm feeling really good, because I'm one of those guys who drives around thinking, bloody farmers have cleared all the trees. Well, no, I love them, that's great. So
Blame yourself.
Hang on 1 second.
Careful with the birds' eggs. I'll get shot if they move.
So I think on behalf of the organisers tonight is a small gift of appreciation for your efforts, Adrian. So I might, what time's the party at your place? We'll come over.